and we ran a Q&A with her. I did not do the interview, but we ran a Q&A with her. And I remember when it was printed, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. But I didn't read it at that point for some reason. I don't know why, but I didn't read it. But I went back later and read it, and then I read the book, and I am just so stoked that I did. And I'll get more to why in a minute. But as the chair of this as was stated, the chair of the board of directors of Haven and Lee County, which is a nonprofit that serves survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault in Sanford, which is about an hour from Orange County. The book was an educational experience and a sobering one. For those of you who don't know, Haven has been around for 35 years, and our mission statement is about healing. We operate a 29-bed shelter for survivors and their children. We offer case management, hospital accompaniment, court advocacy. Carla is our awesome court advocate. She's on. And other services to survivors. We also operate a 24-hour hotline for survivors seeking assistance. You can find more at havenlee.org or facebook.com/havenandleeco. So, but really want to give a shout out to our staff. In the first 6 months of this calendar year, our staff responded to nearly 400 crisis calls and assisted nearly 200 new clients in the first half of the year in a fairly small county in the midst of a pandemic. So it's just, I'm so proud of our staff and everything they've done. But, you know, going back to the book, you know, I had this experience of working with Haven, but then reading this book and seeing the long-term effects of what happened with Rachael on her life, they were nothing new. From what I had seen in Haven, this is a very common experience for a lot of women and men who are assaulted. And while her story is both, you know, compelling and searing, like you said, it's not unique, and thus is the power of her story. Is that it's something that's, well, some of the circumstances in particulars can be unique. It's an experience that a lot of people have faced. A little more about Rachael. She is a writer and public speaker in the sexual violence prevention and mental wellness sectors, and she's based out of Raleigh. She currently speaks with and serves on the board of Interactive Wake County, which is based in Raleigh. It's a nonprofit that's focused on giving sexual assault survivors a voice. You'll hear some of the excerpts from her book, Beads, tonight. As Hannah said, it's a memoir that details her journey from sexual assault victim to survivor. Beads speaks to the challenges that sexual assault victims face and the range of emotions they experience throughout the recovery process. Her story takes place immediately following her graduation from UNC-Chapel Hill. She is a Tar Heel, and describes the many injustices she experienced within the justice system, which are still very pertinent today. As a writer myself, I don't work as a journalist anymore, but I still consider myself a journalist at heart. I experienced the power of words. I know that words can do so much. And in the world of domestic violence and sexual assault in particular, we can use our words to work wonders. I mean, think about all the men and women who shared their stories a couple years ago in the midst of the Me Too movement and how it changed the conversation around sexual harassment and assault. Think of the individuals who bared their souls, sometimes publicly. And I think of Christine Blasey Ford and Anita Hill just within the last 30, 40 years, who spoke and underwent ridicule and shaming because they dared to share their story. And think about the movies and TV shows that have highlighted these issues with how some parts of society react to claims of rape and abuse. My wife just finished watching the show Unbelievable on Netflix. And I haven't watched it yet, but she said it's a very powerful story on that. So, Rachael's book along that lines is both poignant and relatable, simple yet deep, layered yet straightforward. I'm not being paid to say this, by the way. I'm doing this for free, but I really did like it. And I hope that one day I can share stories in a way that's as gifted and poignant and pointed as Rachael does. So I hope my conversation with Rachael tonight can help you guys understand a few things. First, like I said before, the power of words, not just to make a change in someone else's life, but what it might mean for you and how you can use words, particularly within writing. Second, the searing consequences of sexual assault and what we can do to support survivors. And third, specifically, the challenges that have been brought on by COVID, by this pandemic, and how we can literally help people who are hurting and need healing right now. So we're going to start with Rachael. She's going to read a few excerpts from the book, and then we'll get into some questions. Like Hannah said at the beginning, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box, and we'll get to them a little bit later. So Rachael, it's all you.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate your kind words and wanting to do this partnership this evening. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to read the book, and I'm so touched that you enjoyed it as much as you did. So I am going to read some passages right now and tell a few candid stories. This is, for those of you who haven't seen it, the cover of my book. And so it's called Beads, a memoir about falling apart and putting yourself back together again. And I will start off reading some from the preface. Someone wise once said to write what you know. I was raped when I was 22. My journey over the past 12 years is what I know, so I decided to write about it. I had this horrible thing happen to me, but there's beauty in how it shaped me into the person I am today. In this day and age, it seems that people want to be heard more than ever. Whether it is in the form of national rallies or letters to your local congressman, people are speaking out. It could be the media talking at us constantly, but I believe more voices are coming forward, more courage is being displayed, and more change is happening. The Me Too movement against sexual harassment and sexual assault was waged in 2017, and what a shock it was. Women were coming forward after years of silence. It was shocking and powerful. This movement was at the forefront of basically every news source out there. But also how sad, how frustrating. These women and men never reported what happened to them, or if they did, nothing was done about it. Recent statistics show that in the United States alone, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are survivors of sexual violence. Quite disturbing. It all hit way too close to home for me, reminding me of a familiar story, sadly, the one of me 9 years prior. This is from chapter 1. Let me tell you all the ways to avoid getting raped. Exactly, there are none. Sober or drunk, revealing clothes or sweats, makeup or no makeup, it does not matter. It is never the victim's fault. So a little bit about my attack. It's detailed in the book, but I just wanted to, I won't necessarily read those details, just to provide a highlight for those who haven't read it or who don't know me. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time of the attack, and I was interning with an accounting firm. And I had gone out with a friend who happened to be my cousin that evening, and was trying to take a cab back to my apartment. And unfortunately, my cab driver was not who he said he was. I had gotten into the front seat of his car, and he pretended to be on the phone with another customer, and pretended to get lost. And so there were no real red flags until he pulled the car over and burned the car off. And things really went sour and escalated from there. He maneuvered himself onto my side of the car and used a weapon and proceeded to sexually assault me. And, it's one of those moments in your life that you don't ever think you'll be faced with that fight or flight decision. And I think for me, I couldn't really do either. So I froze and just did what I needed to do to get myself out of the situation. Because I was in a car, there was really nowhere for me to go. And because he had a weapon, I couldn't really fight. And I struggled with a lot of guilt with that regard for a while, but I realized that by me essentially kind of turning frozen, I was able to keep myself alive and get myself out of the situation the best that I could. And so after that event, he was thankfully dropped me off about a block from my apartment. Didn't rob me, didn't take anything, my purse, nothing. So he really, had his agenda and saw that through. And the next day was just a complete whirlwind with the sexual assault unit in downtown DC, where I was interrogated, essentially, not believed. Zach, you had mentioned the show Unbelievable, and my experiences with the police were not exactly similar, but they shared a lot of similarities with what she went through. And that was just very devastating, because how I was just trying to think of all the ways that I could get them to believe me, and nothing really seemed to work. And so that was very defeating and difficult for me at the time. And then I spent several hours at the hospital following that. So going back to the book, I get asked a lot how I came up with how I came up with the title Beads. And it's interesting, because it was not initially going to be the title. And as I was writing, I came across this pretty significant story that really resonated with me right after my attack happened. And so I want to share a little bit about that story candidly as well. So this is referring to chapter 8, and it is titled Beads. But right after my attack, my mom, who's actually on the Zoom call, Jean, my mom came to DC, and she took me away from my apartment, and we have a mountain house up in right outside of Boone in the North Carolina mountains. And she took me up there, and we were riding in the car, and she turned and said to me, "Okay, what is one thing that you want to do? Anything at all, you name it, we'll do it." And I decided that I wanted to go to Michael's craft store. I have always loved crafting since I was a kid, and it just was something that brought me comfort and solace, and that's what immediately popped into my head. So we went to Michael's and walked in, and it was just the most beautiful store I had ever seen. I think I was just so excited to be alive, first off, to be able to go into a store again. I mean, my perspective and my mindset was so different, even though I had been in the store several times throughout my life. And I wandered around, trying to figure out what I wanted to get. And I stumbled upon the bead aisle. I had never made jewelry before, but it just looked very appealing to me. So my mom, we just started loading things into the cart. Beads, necklace clasps, earring books, jewelry trays. I mean, everything that you could possibly think of related to jewelry, we loaded into the cart. And $400 later, my mom and I were walking out with the bead aisle from Michael's. And so when I was writing the book, that story really resonated with me, because I sat in her mountain house for about 2 weeks after my attack, and every single morning I would just sit in her loft and I would make this hideous jewelry, and it was my escape and really the beginning of my healing after everything happened. And so it turned into such a significant part of my story, these beads. And after those 2 weeks, I put them all into a bag, and I never looked at them ever again. But it provided me that sense of comfort and solace, and it provided my mind a break from the craziness that I was going through mentally and physically. And so I decided to name the book that, and playing off of this metaphor that, pretend that you're wearing a necklace and someone rips it off and all of your beads scatter all over the floor. And, some you're going to find, some you're going to be able to pick right back up and put right back on your necklace. Some you won't find for years. Some will be misshapen, discolored. Some will be broken. And that was very representative of how my life was and how I've, slowly put my life back together again. So that is a little bit about the title of the book. And now I'll go back to reading a couple more excerpts, and we'll jump into some questions from Zach. So this is chapter 10. It's called The Face. In my efforts to bury and suppress the darkness of prior weeks, I went through the motions of life. I told myself everything was good. I went to my internship every day. I grocery shopped. I brought my clothes to the dry cleaners. I attempted adult conversations, showered, and tried carrying on business as usual. But it wasn't usual. In fact, it was the most unusual I had ever been in my 22 years of life. I needed to do business as usual because if I didn't, I would shatter into a million pieces. I didn't realize how exhausting it was keeping up my type A personality post-rape. I was crumbling inside, but did not always let myself acknowledge it. My attacker at that time was still out and about in the world, living freely, and here I was hiding behind face. I was living in this shell of my former self, trying desperately to get back to that person, but she did not exist anymore. I felt lost. I longed for control, consistency, familiarity, and protection from the dangers of the world. The truth of the matter is that I had none of those, or at least I didn't feel like I did. Regardless of how good my face was, and it was superb, it was completely external. Face became an ironclad barrier to my inside world. Suppression felt like the best coping mechanism at the time. This excerpt is from chapter 53, towards the end of the book. It's called The Other Side. June 29th, 2008 made me a victim. Over the past decade, I've made myself a survivor. It's not something I would wish on anyone, but damn am I thankful for what I've learned and for where I am now on the other side. Today, my husband and I live with our 2 boys in our lovely house in a cul-de-sac. We've been married for almost 8 years, with many more to come. I am happily retired for now and staying at home with right now I'm staying at home with both of my kids. Our amazing families live close by. We have a wonderful group of friends and neighbors, and we are truly loved. Okay, my last excerpt is from the very last page of the book. Life is a funny thing. One day you are about to die, and the next you're living this beautiful life. Somehow I managed to take something awful and turn it into something productive, something hopeful, and something beautiful. I did that. My attacker may not have taken my life that night, but I am the one who decided to keep living. No one can ever take that strength from me, and if I can do it, anyone can. Trust me.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel, for sharing both candidly and from the book. So, let's get into some questions. So back to the very first thing you read in the first sentence of your book, you said, someone wise once said to write what you know, which I've also heard. I don't know who that someone wise is, but for
Me
you,
either.
yeah, I know, right? Is this something you hear? But
It is.
for you, what does it mean to write what you know and write your truth? What does that look like for you?
So for me, a little bit more about my background. I was a business major in college and got my master's of accounting, and never in my life would I've ever imagined writing a book. And so when I decided and set out to do this, I told myself, if I'm going to do this, I am going to write my truth. I'm going to write this story exactly as I remember it and kind of go in chronological order. And I wrote it as if I was able to connect with the reader and allow them to feel like they were having a conversation with me. And I think for me, putting everything in the rawest form that I possibly could, and not necessarily complex sentences, not fancy words, but something that someone could truly relate to and be able to resonate with, was what I sought out to do. And in doing so, it unfolded very naturally for someone who would never have considered themselves a writer. And so basically, I literally just I took that cliche statement that I started the book with, and wrote exactly what I knew, exactly what I remembered, and I did it in the simplest way that I could, without leaving out major details. And I wrote it in a way that would be engaging, so that if I were to pick it up, that would be something that I would want to read. And so, yeah, it was just my most raw form of truth that you could possibly get.
Was it difficult for you, or was it therapeutic? Was it both? Just having to, I mean, because when you write something like that and you write your truth, you relive it. I mean,
Yeah.
so was that a therapeutic thing? Was it hard? Was it both?
There were times when it was hard. There were days where I could only write a little bit, especially in some of those earlier chapters when I was really detailing out the attack and my experiences right after. Those were tough, but at the same time, it was also very, very therapeutic for me. And I felt this almost like this rush of putting, at times I couldn't get the words down on the paper quick enough because I was so excited in a way that the story was coming together so well. And I started to realize how much of an impact this could have, and how much I realized that I was making the right decision by writing all of this, despite how hard it was. And so, yeah, there were definitely times where I had to shut my computer and I had to be done for the day. But overall, the process was very, very therapeutic and brought me, I don't know, just kind of this invigorating feeling that I was going above and beyond how I was treated and the things that I went through, and it gave me a sense of power in that way, that I was kind of doing this on my own terms, and that was really, really awesome to feel while I was writing it.
Did you ever doubt yourself in that writing?
Well, I'll tell you, I never thought I would get published. I kind of set out on this crazy journey, and I quit my job in corporate America, and I decided I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom / give this thing a shot. But I did not. That did not stop me from getting it all out on paper, because I figured if I did not get published, I could have at least kind of recounted everything that had happened over the past decade, and used that in some way in my healing. But when I connected with my editor and she decided to take me on as a client, each step of the way with each person that would read a little bit and give me their feedback, and it was mostly positive, there was just a lot of shock. Not necessarily doubt, because I kept going, but just more shock in that people read my words and thought that it was good enough to turn into a book. So the whole process was very surreal, and it was just very neat to go through all those milestones of turning it into what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, as a writer, whenever you're writing something, you're creating something, and you're putting yourself out there, whether it's a memoir or just you're writing down what's going on, you're putting yourself out there to be analyzed and judged and evaluated by what you write. And so it's a lot, and especially for a story like yours that's so personal, it's a lot. Were there any people you were, I'm not, you don't have to name people, were there any people you were nervous about reading it? Was that something that played a role at all?
Yes. So there were a handful of people who I won't name, but there were a handful of people that I was just petrified to pick up the book and read it, for an array of reasons. Some of which being that some people didn't know the nitty-gritty details. Some didn't know my thought process and my feelings in my head. I didn't really explain a lot of that to anybody at the time. And so this book was really the first time that I was laying out a lot of my just how my mind worked during all of that time. And so that for me was very daunting, not necessarily for people that I didn't know to read it, but for those select few that I did know, I was very, very nervous. But thankfully, those nerves calmed down after they read the book and just were able to see the full story and see the full picture. So
Yeah, that's awesome. How did you said you never expected to be a writer, never thought that was going to be part of your life, and I'm sure that I grew up always thinking I was going to be a writer, but I'm probably unique. But for people who have never really are in the same boat as you, how did you make that transition to like, okay, how did you prepare yourself to embark on that journey of, okay, I'm a writer now? Like that's quite a shift from I'm going to be an accountant to I'm going to be a writer.
Yeah. So yes, like I said, I can't say it enough. I never thought I would make that shift. I thought corporate America was where I needed to be and what I needed to be doing, and it was what I went to school for. And to be quite honest, I don't know that I really prepared myself in any particular way to be a writer. The Me Too movement happened, and I kind of started marinating on this idea of what if I just start writing about my story and I don't know, submit it to a news outlet or a newspaper or something along those lines. So I started to kind of marinate on that idea, and then I talked myself out of it because I am not a writer. So what do I know? And over the course of those months where I was still kind of bouncing the idea back and forth in my head, I sat down one day and I just decided to start writing as if I were writing a book. And I wrote out the first couple of chapters very quickly. And I was like, okay, I think that I could actually come up with enough content to make a pretty decent sized book if that's where I want to go with this thing. And I was pregnant at the time, so I took a bit of a hiatus when I had the baby and wasn't sleeping. But when I made the decision not to go back to work after my maternity leave, that was, I think, when I would say that I prepared myself most in a sense that I said to myself, okay, I'm either gonna do this and submit it to an editor, and if I don't get picked up, then I will stop. But if the editor thinks that I have good content, because at that point no one else had read any of my words, I told myself that I would keep going. It was almost like I just needed that one person to give me the vote of confidence. And it's still weird to call myself a writer, to be honest, because, that's just, not something that I thought that I would be. But I have found that what was most helpful for me, not having this, English background or these aspirations and dreams to ever write a book, I found that when I started writing, I didn't want to emulate or I didn't want to base my writing off of anybody else. So I, really didn't do a whole lot of research about how to write a book. I just started doing it. And that was very beneficial for me in the end, because I think that lent some uniqueness to my story, because I wasn't, I didn't have somebody that I was aspiring to write like, or a book that I was trying to imitate, or it really was just me sitting down at my computer and starting to write sentences. So it's crazy, honestly, because my lack of background and I think people have this perception that oh my gosh, like you wrote a book, like how in the world did you possibly do that? And my very simple answer has always been, I literally just sat down at my computer and started writing. That was it. That was all the preparation that I did.
Definitely. Continue.
With,
Sorry. I
oh,
was
no,
going to
no,
ask a
no.
question.
Yep. I was wrapped up.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that was going to be my next question, is for people who want to or are considering writing their truth, like how do you do that? And it sounds, I mean, you answered the question, just do it.
Right.
Yeah. I
Yes.
think
My biggest piece of advice, especially right now in this season of craziness that we're all living in, you know, now's as good a time as any. If you've been thinking about doing something or writing a book, just start. It doesn't, it doesn't mean that it has to go anywhere. It doesn't mean that it has to turn into anything, honestly. But for me, just starting, sitting down, getting past those labels of me being an accountant and not a writer, and really just sitting down and letting the words flow. That is the best piece of advice that I can do, or that I can give.
Yeah, I think, as writing is such a creative effort and involves giving of yourself, and that can be really intimidating. It can be, you ask a lot of yourself, especially when you choose to write about yourself. You're like, not only am I putting myself out there creatively, I'm putting my life out there. And that is an intimidating task for a lot of people. And I think, like you said, whether it goes out for hundreds of thousands of people to read, or if it's just you and you're the only one that ever reads it, it can still be a very therapeutic process. It can still be really, really helpful.
Yes.
So what was the most fun part you had in writing the book? Was there a fun part, or was it all just like
yes,
challenging?
there was. I would say a couple of things. First, kind of realizing how significant the beads were in my life, and how just kind of funny that it was those horrible pieces of jewelry that I made that really ended up sticking with me for the rest of my life. And just that time that I spent with my mom, and realizing, not realizing at the time, like how pivotal that was for me. And that was really, really fun to make the decision to name the book Beads. And that moment was probably the one of the coolest moments when I was writing, is finally landing on a title. And then other really fun moments, when I got picked up as a client for my editor, and then I submitted my manuscript to 2 publishing houses, and within 2 days, I heard back from both of them saying that they were interested in picking up the book and turning it into what it is now. And so that was absolutely insane. Again, a huge shock factor. And that was also so much fun. Sorry.
That's
my husband. But yeah, so just those milestones, and every bit of the way that I continued to progress in the journey, and just gaining more confidence within myself in what I was trying to create and what I was trying to do, and having people see that those same things and have the same goals that I did was it was really, really cool. And I have met some amazing people along the way, and including my publicist and just other survivors. And so yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of a year, but it's just very rewarding and fun, honestly, in that regard, even though the subject matter is tough. But being able to connect with as many people as I have, I am literally living what I set out to do. And so that is just really, really cool to me.
Yeah, it's a blessing that not a lot of people get to experience in that way. So that's really cool. Last thing kind of about writing, and then we'll dive into a few other things. How did you decide what to share and what not to share? You talk about writing your truth and sharing of yourself. I mean, was there anything you didn't share because it was too much or for any other reason?
So I will say there's not a whole lot left out. There are a few stories over the course of those years that I did not include in the book, for fear of when particular people would read it. Some of the stories were particularly triggering for me, and so I didn't want to put something in the book that was going to necessarily make me spiral in a way. But I will say that those are very few and far between. There's really nothing other than a few details that I left out. And that was also very important to me, because I made the decision when I was going to write this that if I was going to do it, I was going to be all in. And I think that was very important so that people could really understand, my full journey, the good, the bad, the ugly, the happy, the sad. I think that it's very real life, and a lot of people go through all of that but don't necessarily talk about it. And so there's really not a whole lot that I left out, with the exception of just a few things, but not significant in a way that I felt badly about not including them. So
definitely. One of the things that you and I had talked about briefly when we talked before is that your Me Too story is of kind of a normal person. That a lot of the Me Too stories we heard are of actors and celebrities. And there's you, who is, well, you're not an actor, right?
No.
Okay. Maybe a little bit of a celebrity, but we can parse that later. But what do you hope people get out of this story of you sharing? What's you may have mentioned a couple things before. What's the goal? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think that encompasses a lot of what I set out to do here. And going back to me being that quote unquote normal person. I mean, what is normal, right? I mean, these days, but I am not somebody that the world knew. I was not in the media. I wasn't a story on E! News, and I think what the media highlighted, left out so much. And so when I decided to write about my journey, I wanted to make sure that I included the mental aspect of all of this, because obviously, the physical aspect happens and you deal with that, but the mental aspects are lifelong, and those are just things that you don't hear in the media. And the Me Too movement, it, as with many things, it kind of swooped in. It was on everybody's topic of conversation, and then it slowly but surely kind of dies down, and another media sensation picks up. And the difference is for all of those survivors, myself included, that doesn't just go away. When the news stops reporting on it, it doesn't just stop going away. And so I wanted those people and anyone who's been through trauma to feel less alone, to validate that I had a great childhood. I went to a great university. I had my whole future kind of laid out, my career path, and this happened, and all of that came to a screeching halt. And I just wanted to convey that you're not alone in all of those feelings. When you have that huge wrench that's thrown in your life that's unexpected, despite how good of a person or how good life has been up to this point, it's things can change in an instant. And that was very important for me to explain. And so to answer your question more directly, I want people to feel like they are not alone in whatever struggles they're going through. So it may be rape, it may be a divorce, it may be a loss of a family member or a child, or infertility. There's a wide range of ways that we can all deal with trauma. And I think that I was able to touch on a lot of, just how we all cope. And I just, it's taboo. People don't talk a lot about the mental process and mental health and depression and anxiety. And I felt like I really wanted to push the envelope and talk about those things, because everyone experiences them, but not enough people talk about them. So I decided to go there in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really, those of you who know me, who are on here, I'm really passionate about mental health things, particularly that I myself have struggled with depression, anxiety a lot, and take medication for it right now. And I think, you said that's something you really wanted people out of the book. And I think it gets through. And even I related to a couple of things just you felt mentally and emotionally, just because some of those things go beyond just one particular traumatic event. That trauma affects people. No matter the trauma, it can affect people in really similar ways.
Right.
Where are you right now, mentally and emotionally? Now that we're 12 years beyond 12 years in a couple months beyond the incident. Where are you right now?
So I will say, as we all know, 2020 has been a year for the ages. And prior to COVID, I was in a really good place, and I still am in a lot of ways. But I was getting ready to embark on my book tour, and I was just feeling really at peace with where I was emotionally, mentally. And, unfortunately, COVID happened, and a lot of those events were canceled. And I found myself on a little bit of a mental health roller coaster, as I'm sure so many others have and still are experiencing. And, it was triggering in a way, because it brought up kind of all those feelings of loss of control and a lot of unknown in the future. There's always unknown, but I feel like right now there's just a lot of unknown. And so I found this particular year to be rather challenging, just because of all the external society and just everything else that's going on. But COVID aside, I'm doing relatively well. I have two boys that are 5 and 2, and one of them just started virtual kindergarten. So we're navigating, being new to school. And like I mentioned before, when I read from the book, my husband and I, we will be celebrating our 8th anniversary in October. So from that standpoint, things are so good that and in a way that I never thought that I would have those things in life, directly following what I went through 12 years ago. I never could have imagined that this is where I would be, just over a decade later. And, I can truly say that I am doing this, this book and this message and speaking is truly my passion. And so it's really cool. I don't think a lot of people get to experience and maybe feel like they can't live out their true passion. And so I feel very fortunate that that I have the opportunity to do this, and that I have the opportunity to speak and help others and connect with others in a way, again, that I never thought that I would before. So kind of a all around crazy answer. This year has been a struggle for me, but again, strip away some of those extraneous factors. I am doing very well with where I am and how far I've come.
Yeah, I think we can all put an asterisk on 2020, just that when we look back, it's like, all right, this is just a weird year and we'll just have to move on. So
carry on.
you said you're working with your first kid on virtual schooling. What's the secret to doing it right?
There isn't one. Fake it till you make it. I am trying to stay as hands off as possible, which is hard with a 5-year-old. But I think it's hard to watch your child make mistakes, and you want to swoop in and save them and fix them and make it all better. But I just keep telling myself that if he were actually in school, I wouldn't be sitting right next to him, and he would be fending for himself. And so I came to that realization this week that that's kind of the mindset that I have to take on if we're going to get through this. So yeah, we're taking it one day at a time.
Yeah, say if tipping your teachers was a thing, now is the time.
Oh my gosh! I mean, they're saints. I'm so thankful for everything
yes,
that
they are.
the school system is doing right now. So.
Oh yeah. Special shout out to my wife, who is a second grade teacher now. So she's
amazing.
living it. She's living it. She is amazing. That's for sure.
Stuff.
So to COVID, you're working with Interact in Wake County. How has COVID affected what you guys are doing with that organization?
Yeah, so a little background for those who don't know about Interactive Wake County. They're similar to Haven, and I am on the board of directors and have been a volunteer with this organization for just over 7 years. And I'm a survivor speaker with them, and last year was asked to join the board. And so I've really been able to see kind of the inner workings of the organization, and more so than being a volunteer. And so when COVID happened, it is quite devastating and frightening to see how much the crisis lines, in particular, people calling in, people online chatting, just the volume of those calls and the volume of just people needing help, that has been very, very alarming and eye-opening. And the other side of it is just the physical needs of the shelter. So we, like Haven, we have a shelter that has 45 beds for victims and their children to come. And of course, there's a lot of shared space there. So thankfully, the city of Raleigh has teamed up with Interact and a couple of other organizations, and 2 major hotels here have offered to be sort of a well hotel and then a not so well hotel. And so thankfully, the shelter victims and their families have been able to relocate these hotels, which just really speaks volumes to the community and the fact that there are good people in the world that are willing to help. And so that's really been the biggest, I think, obstacle is just making sure that the current shelter victims and are being taken care of and being kept safe as possible, and also just helping those at home as much as possible as well.
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest thing for us is a lot of the logistics around trying to keep people in the shelter healthy is a big ask. And I mean, it's something that we need to do just for people's health and safety, but it's a big ask, and nonprofits already aren't, you know, money doesn't grow on trees and inside our
Right.
buildings.
Right.
It's and nonprofits across the country have struggled financially this year because fundraisers have been canceled, and
Yeah.
it's a tough time.
Yeah, that's something I didn't speak to. But yeah, a lot of their their big ask event that was supposed to take place in May got canceled, and so um, really just getting creative at continuing to find those funds and be able to continue providing services, albeit in a completely different way. But yeah, it's been tough, but the organization as a whole has done an amazing job from just a service standpoint and a safety standpoint. So really they've done such a good job of trying to navigate and quickly.
Yeah.
So
How can people help out Interact? What's the best way for people to support you guys?
So honestly, the best thing is probably donations, and also on their website there are wish lists for things that folks need in the hotels, just basic things, medicine or diapers or clothing, just kind of your basic food, water, shelter needs, and just donations to keep the services afloat and the crisis lines going. And they've kept their Solace Center open, which is the area where sexual assault victims can go within the building and meet with a member of the police department and a sexual assault nurse examiner and have their rape kits done. And so that is the only part of the building that has actually remained open. And that has also seen a lot of traffic, sadly, in the past 6 months in particular. And so, yeah, just being able to keep all of those things afloat and moving, and being able to take on the increased victims this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, for Haven, the same thing. Just financial resources are so important right now, because of fundraisers. And where can people find Interact? Is there a website link that you can share?
There is, and actually, if you, the easiest place would probably be to just go to my website, so rachelbrooks.com. I have a resources tab that highlights several organizations that support victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and abuse, and Interact is highlighted on there. And their website is, it's great. They provide a lot of information. There's a donate button, and just a lot of information to have people gain a better understanding of what they do and the clients that they serve, and the services that they provide.
Excellent. Yeah, same thing for Haven. It's all online. It's a great tool to have these days. So, well, I could ask more questions, but I want to open it up to see if there's anybody in the audience that wants to ask a question. If you want to throw it in the chat, that would be
Sure.
great. If anybody has
Perfect.
questions.
And Kim, thank you. She put the Interact website in the chat also, if anyone wants to jot that down. And for survivors as well, they've added a new feature during COVID. Being at home, it's sometimes not the easiest to talk on the phone if you're in a home with your abuser, or you're just not in a safe situation. So Interact off their website has added a feature where you can online chat, which is great. And they also have a feature that there's a button at the top of the website where you can click it and the website will go away immediately. So if someone were to be approaching you or see what's on your computer, you could click out of the website very quickly so that it wouldn't be known what you were doing. So just to highlight those things as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, so I'll ask another one to
Okay.
give people some time to work on it. Is there? I love asking people about like the music they listen to or books they've read that kind of like inspire them or encourage them or just something they're enjoying. Was there anything during? You mentioned it wasn't any author you were trying to be like or any book you were aspiring to write. But was there anything that inspired you, any kind of other art or any other kind of writing that did inspire you during that time?
Yeah, so not so much writing per se, but I listened to a lot of music when I wrote. One band in particular, I listened to the Lumineers, just very calming, and would kind of throw their albums on repeat. And um, it was weird because I'm usually not the type of person that can listen to words and type at the same time. Like I have to be silent in that way. But it was just very calming and nice. And I was able to formulate my thoughts a lot better with the music in my head, rather than it being silent.
No.
And the other aspect of, again, not so much writing, or not so much an author or book or anything like that, but I would hop around to different coffee shops around Raleigh, and that's where I wrote the majority of my book, was at all different coffee shops. So it's kind of cool when I go back. I kind of can look and see where I sat and kind of almost remember like what I wrote at that particular coffee shop, which sounds weird, but it's just kind of cool. It was something that I enjoyed doing when I was heavy into the writing process. So.
Definitely. Awesome. We got a few questions coming in now. Let's start with this one from, it says from Rick Peterson. Hi, Rachel, you're a star. Many thanks. How will you talk to your kids when they ask you about the book? That's a really good question that I wish I had come up with, because that's real good.
It's a great question. And these are dear family friends of mine that are up in right outside of Boston. So hi, Rick and Dee Dee. So yeah, I've actually been asked this question a couple of times in my journey, and I don't necessarily have a great answer, but I think the best answer that I can give is to be as honest as I can with them, and not necessarily give them the full-blown details, but just to let them know that their mom has gone through something traumatic, and kind of here's what I did to cope, and focus a lot on just being open to sharing your feelings, and if you're going through a hard time, to express that. So not necessarily so much that they need to know about the details of the attack, but I think the big takeaways for me as a parent are just raising them to know that it's okay to express themselves, and that they don't necessarily have to put a happy face on everything, because that's not real life. And yeah, and obviously they're going to get to a point in time where they're going to be able to read it. And I think that I just have to kind of cross that bridge when it gets there. I have a couple of tattoos as well, which those who have read the book and those who know me, and I have my tattoo on my wrist is Survivor. And a couple of people have also asked me, what are you going to do when one of your